We've been holding our breath for hours now, but it's hard to do a podcast without breathing. This is America's most breathless podcast, The Pod People. I'm silent but deadly, Matisse Van Rossum.
I'm Ben Sheets, and I have one question for you guys. Who let the dogs out?
And I'm Cleveland Mosier, and, well, I'm just basting away in Margaritaville.
That's really good. And this week, we're coming at you with Ben's Choice, which is the 2016 film Don't Breathe, written and directed by Fede Alvarez and starring Stephen Lang, Jane Levy, Dylan Minnette, and Daniel Zavado. And it's the story of some fucking punks who try to rob a blind veteran.
In Detroit City.
In Detroit City. Ben, why did you want to talk about Don't Breathe?
I really love this film. I think it's one of the most underrated movies of the 2010s. It was number 8 in my top 10 horror movies of the decade. I think this movie is a really amazing mixture of Hitchcockian thriller and sleazy exploitation. It's a hard thing to nail those two without it leaning too far one way or the other. This movie is really stylish and really awesome, and I'm super excited to talk about it more than anything.
I remember going to see this in theaters, and I thought it was fucking awesome. I remember seeing the previews and thinking, like, oh yeah, that looks like a cool, fun horror movie. And it turned out to exceed my expectations, and it was a really nice rewatch. I forgot how really tense and harrowing certain sequences are. Cleveland, how did it strike you on a first viewing?
That was pretty good. While it was my first viewing, when the film came out, my reaction to the trailer was very similar to yours, Tease, which was kind of meh, thinking like, oh, that looks like it could be good, maybe not. And at the time, I was living in a cabin in the middle of nowhere and had really no opportunities to go out and see movies. So I just caught a review of it, thinking that I wouldn't be watching it anytime soon. I didn't have any interest in it. But while painting and stuff, like sometimes that stuff comes up in my YouTube feed. So I did know how the film ended, which I know as a reviewer and whatnot, that is in really bad form. Too bad, deal with it. That's what happened.
Yeah, people get movies spoiled for them all the time, you know. It's
one thing like to have a movie spoiled for you. It's another thing just like to go out of your way to just like find out, you know, like to learn what the ending is without having seen the film and whatever. But
I do want to say,
if I'm not interested in seeing the film, like I'll catch reviews.
Don't know the ending to this movie, I would recommend watching it and not having it spoiled.
Yeah, it's a good subversion.
Yeah, I think so. I will take a second to go off on a slight tangent that I think like the whole idea of like spoilers being a big deal is kind of overrated, because I think that like a good film will still be good regardless of whether you know the ending beforehand or not.
See, and the thing is I think that's a good example of it. This is a great film for that, because I had a wonderful time watching it for the first time knowing the ending. It did not ruin it for me in any way.
I think the twists are incidental, or rather secondary to like the ride.
Yeah.
Yes.
And also like knowing what happens and seeing what happens, very different. Very different, because
True.
you can hear about one of the sequences in this film. It painted a very different picture in my mind. Sorry, I changed tense halfway through that, but and also subject. I heard about one of the sequences in this film, and it painted a bad picture in my head, and I didn't want to see it because I thought that was pretty I didn't think it was very tasteful and not for me, but then I had to watch it for the podcast, and I thought it was fine. I think it was well enough handled. Execution is important. We've said it before, and we'll say it again.
I have plenty of thoughts on that sequence, and I think anybody who knows this movie knows which sequence we're talking about, but I think it's a very bad place to start with this movie.
Yeah, which I think we can dance around it and move on. And then, hey, now, if you're listening and you don't know... We've set up some tension. We've set up some an arc, you know.
Yes.
you know that we're going to talk about something later on in the episode. Crazy that.
So this film is set in the industrial wasteland of Detroit, Michigan.
This is not the first time on the podcast we've had to apologize to our Detroit listeners, and it probably won't be the last, but we are sorry.
Honestly,
Just sorry you're living in Detroit, really.
Yeah.
But, like, I mean, you know.
I really love Detroit as a setting for horror movies. It Follows did that. Don't Breathe does that. I think that just like Detroit as a landscape and like the context of this country's history and how like the country has really failed that city and continues to over and over again, and how that like affects, you know, it as an environment and the people who live there. Really good. Our protagonists are cat burglars breaking into people's houses, stealing valuables. Our main one is Rocky, who's played by Jane Levy. And then her boyfriend, Money, who is a James Franco in Spring Breakers-esque kind of punk white dude.
With cornrows.
With cornrows, and his name is Money. And then there is our nice guy, Alex, who only does this because he wants to help Rocky out in the hopes that, you know, she'll realize how shitty her current boyfriend is, and, you know, very, very traditional nice guy.
Nice guy. I was going to use that word,
story.
too.
Yeah, I mean, there's no other way to describe
Yeah,
it.
he's a nice guy.
While we were watching this, I couldn't stop making the please, ma'am, just a crumb of pussy joke because he's. And honestly, we'll get to this later.
It works for the film. It's not tired in the movie.
I like the way that the film handles it too and resolves it, because like that character is, especially like in like modern film, that character I think is kind of detestable in his own way. I think all of these characters are relatively unlikable by design.
Yeah, that's what I really love about this movie. I don't think there's any particularly likable characters. You know, like, you could argue Jane Levy, because of the situation that she's
Right.
in, is worse than what she's doing.
For sure.
Is likable because of that, but she's not a good character.
Oh, she's flawed, though. I like that
Yeah,
about her.
she's the most sympathetic and the most relatable, I think. Enough that like we are invested in what happens to her, but still she's flawed enough to feel real.
I like that her and Money's big goal is to get enough cash to go to California.
Right.
And I'm just like, oh, you sweet summer child.
It's like, what are you gonna do once you get to California?
where things are more expensive.
Right.
Great.
Just start robbing richer people, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we see that her home life is shitty. Her mom's a drunk. Her stepdad is
You develop a lot of sympathy for her in that scene.
Yeah,
too.
her stepdad's a Nazi, got a big old swastika tattooed on the back of his
Yeah.
hand. So that's how we know we're supposed to dislike him. And, you know, but she's got a little sister who she really wants to get out of that situation. So, you know, she's got to rob so that she can take her sister away and go to California so they can go to the beach together. Meanwhile, Alex, who is like the nice, tender, caring character, is like, he's really just in it for selfish reasons, which is why I think he, despite how obnoxious Money is, I think Alex might be the most unlikable character, or the
Yes.
character that I like in this movie the least.
I think casting was great too. That actor, he has these like doughy eyes, like these
Yeah.
like those little baby deer, this little fawn. And during like the particularly horrifying sequences, like whenever it cuts to him and his wide eyes, it's very effective. Like it works quite well. He's quite a competent actor. I think everyone in this film does a spectacular job in the moment.
Well, they get a tip that this old man, a blind Gulf War veteran who lives alone in on the last occupied house of like a totally derelict street, he's got some settlement money from when a rich girl killed his daughter in a car accident. So the street is isolated, he's blind, he's old, and he's sitting on a gold mine. So they think, oh yeah, easy, we'll just break into his house, get away with the money, and then we're, you know, sure sailing to California. And obviously, things do not quite go as planned, as it turns out that this blind man is somewhat of a shinobi.
I really love how tight all of the introduction is. It's a good, like, 5-10 minutes.
Yeah, they get into the house about 15 minutes in.
Yeah, it's really no nonsense.
Which
They
I
don't-
appreciate.
Yeah, they don't take too much time introducing the characters. They give you enough to understand the backstory and sympathize with them. But overall, I think the pacing of this movie is really excellent, and that's a great example of that.
It would have been tired to spend too much more time setting it up at the beginning.
Straight to
Like,
the action,
I
because
don't-
the premise doesn't take much thought.
No, it's simple and it's efficient, and I like that about it. And I don't think Fede Alvarez is the best dialogue writer. He's not terrible, but I appreciate that, like, set up the main characters and the events quickly, get into the house, and then there's not a lot of, like, real dialogue, you know? Especially because most of the movie is about them trying to be quiet to avoid his sort of, like, unnaturally attuned sense of hearing.
Like
So,
Daredevil,
Yeah,
the Marvel
right.
superhero.
Yep. We should mention that the blind man is played by Stephen Lang, who's really awesome in this movie.
He's really awesome in everything I've seen him in.
Yeah.
He's always he always shows up, even in bad films.
Yeah, well, okay, yeah, that's true. I was gonna say, in regards to Avatar, but I guess he probably is one of the better parts of that movie.
Oh wait, he's in Avatar?
Yeah, he's the
Last Airbender?
No. The James Cameron.
He's the colonel,
Yeah.
the evil
They're
colonel.
the same movie, but yeah,
What?
I don't know.
Let's not even-
not good
we're-
CG. I don't know.
Not even gonna get into that. But yeah, he's fantastic in this, and like he has to do a lot of like physical acting because he doesn't have many lines, at least until like towards the end, and he's great. I love the way that they set up him as kind of like a almost like a wolf in sheep's clothing. Like he seems to be like at the beginning, like a feeble, scared old blind man. Like, who are these people in his house? And then just like very quickly just becomes like a killing machine.
You know what this film reminded me of a great deal? It's like a much more down-to-earth Collector. Because the Collector
Yeah, kind of.
also has a burglar protagonist.
Yeah, you're right.
And he goes in and turns out, he's not robbing the house is robbing him of his life. And I appreciate that. Like, because I don't think I've seen it again. I've seen it recently. Like, I feel like a lot of the stuff in The Collector is like done in poor taste, but there are some fun ideas in that movie. I remember seeing that in theaters when I was but a wee lad and edgy and loved edgy things. And
I even saw the sequel in theaters.
yeah, see, that I didn't do. I never saw that.
It was bad.
Yeah, I believe it. It was creative and fun and kind of goofy, and I think that this is what that film was trying to be in a lot of ways.
You know what I will say before we started recording, when we were talking about it, Ben, you described it as like the reverse Home Alone, which
I'm not trapped in here with you. You're trapped in here with me.
right, and I think that is a semi-accurate analog, but like he doesn't really set up traps for them, which I'm kind of glad about.
Yeah,
I
it's
think
much less silly.
definitely.
If you
Yeah.
want like a more direct reverse Home Alone, look at something like People Under the Stairs.
Or the Collector.
The Collector,
Or the
yeah.
Collector.
That is the ultimate reverse Home Alone.
We'll cover People Under the Stairs at some point because that is straight up slapstick at points. But this movie, yeah, it's very straight faced
Yeah.
for the most part. A lot of the action comes from the tension of him being blind.
Yeah.
And that missing element working into a lot of the tense moments and scares. But I think it works really well, and it's the better for it.
I appreciate too that like his sense of hearing is heightened but not like supernatural. It's not like Daredevil, like he's not able to like build a sonic picture of the room. Like so many of the tense scenes are you know, like trying to be quiet as he's like trying to find them in a room, and like him waving the gun around and like passing it over them and stopping on them, and then like something happens and he shoots off in a different direction, and I love all of that stuff.
Yeah, the audio I think sells it. You are so keyed into the sound always. The tension is built around those big pauses of silence and waiting for what the next sound you're going to hear is. And it's a little done, but here it was always done well. So I definitely never minded it. I enjoyed it every time.
Well, and one of the interesting things is I think this movie works well in a home viewing experience, but I think it works particularly well with an audience, especially in a theater setting.
With a good sound system,
Because
yeah.
this film is so immersive and stylistic that with a good audience, people will be quiet and it'll really elevate the tension
A good
and
audience.
the scares.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I know when we saw it, we did have a good audience, if I remember correctly. And the scares were elevated because it was so silent in the theater and everyone was trying to listen to
And
the point that we're
if I recall
happening.
correctly, we were also lucky enough to not have a loud film next door, because
Yes.
that's always the danger of a movie like this or something like A Quiet Place or Hush, like in the theater, is in the really quiet moments. If Black Panther is playing next door, then it's easy to get distracted.
One thing that was also on my mind, on the brain before going in to see this film, is that I was worried that it was going to paint folks with disabilities in like a monstrous light again, a la Glass, a la name your film.
Yeah.
And I don't think this film does. What makes him a monster is not that he's blind.
No,
Like,
definitely.
That is definitely not it. I think it's a very cool element that has been added in, and it's well thought out, and it plays in well to the tension and the creativity and the puzzle solving of each sequence masterfully, and without ever, I think, shining a bad light on blind people. You could make frankly, I think a dumb argument. You could make an argument for like the shots of his kind of glossed over pupils as being like spooky, and that being like, oh, blind people scary, but fuck you. Like, it's
Well,
fine. Like,
blind in this case, I think it works because blind people scary because he's an Iraq war vet who got his eyes blown out by a grenade.
yeah.
Yeah.
You
Plus
know,
other things.
Yeah.
Most definitely. No, absolutely. Like in this case, spooky because of that. And so personally, I think it passes it passes full marks just fine. But worth mentioning because there are a lot of films that
Yeah.
miss that little pratfall.
That kind of goes back to the point I was making, is that he's not like a bat, you know?
He's not a caricature.
He's
you
not.
know?
Yeah, he's not a caricature. He's not like a supernatural beast. He is a man with a very acute sense of his surroundings, who has like extensive combat training and is also like clearly extremely mentally unstable. And he feels like a realistic villain. And what I like about that, at least until certain things are made clear, is that for a while, I don't think he's even really the villain. Like, these fucking burglars are, like, they've broken into his house. They're trying to steal his money. Like, they're taking advantage of him.
Yeah, and they know he's blind before they break in, you know?
Right.
They're taking advantage of someone who is seemingly, you know...
Yeah, they're taking advantage of his disability
vulnerable.
in order to rob him, which is why I am so glad that the film doesn't like try to paint these people as like virtuous robbers. Once again, Rocky kind of is, like, you know, she has her good reasons for doing what she does, but like
her actions aren't good.
Right, exactly.
You know, and one thing I really love about how they set up him and the house and spatial awareness is when they first break into the house, they have this really, really long one take of them casing out the whole house, and it just tracks with the characters as they explore every nook and cranny. And having that right when they go in the house is so important for this movie to build spatial awareness.
Yeah,
Because
totally.
I feel like after that point, we kind of understand where they are within the house at any given moment.
Yeah,
And
we as the audience know the layout because it doesn't cut when they're casing it. So, like, we know the paths that they can take to get to the exits and stuff.
And it makes the space feel so much more real and physical. And I think it especially works because, like you were saying, before things take a turn about, I don't know, halfway into the movie,
Yeah, probably.
we kind of sympathize with the blind guy because we almost see through his eyes and his sense
Yeah.
of spatial awareness of his own house.
Also, like, he doesn't seem to, like, take pleasure in what he's doing. Like, he does feel, like, tense and afraid and, like, trying to protect, you know, his territory, his home, for lack of a better word. So it's not just like all of a sudden he just becomes a ruthless killing machine that can find you in the dark just by listening for you, you know? Like,
Well, it has
that wouldn't have been interesting, I don't think.
it has that same feeling of like the adventurers like going into the dragon's lair, right? And the dragon is guarding its clutch, you know, like its eggs. It's
Smaug.
Smaug, exactly. Burglars. You know, I was actually looking up Smaug quotes earlier to try and in lieu of that. But I think the vibe is very similar. This film left me wanting that out of a movie. Like I'd love to see a fantasy film with the same premise. I think that in the hands of a competent director, like you could have something pretty thrilling there. You know, like it's a tale as old as time. But I think you could add a lot of tension if you brought the fantasy of it into the horror genre.
Yeah, I could see that for sure.
One thing I really love about the sense of tension and timelessness, like you said, of the story of this film is, I mentioned it earlier, but it feels very Hitchcockian.
Yeah.
In that it doesn't feel particularly flashy in a lot of respects. It, you know, has its conceptual base and it plays into that. And it sticks to that path for the most part. I feel like this follows the lineage of Hitchcock or something like Wait Until Dark. It's not terribly high concept, but they follow it in execution and they stick to their guns. And I really respect that.
Yeah, I like the simplicity.
Like you mentioned earlier, Cleve, this movie is built upon sound in a lot of ways. I think the soundtrack is really critical to this film, and I think it does a fantastic job of building tension by using everyday sounds in the scoring.
This film really has, like, great attention to detail. That's one of the things that I appreciate about it the most. Like, it's extremely thorough in its world building. The long take of, like, going through the house showcases that really well, but also, like, other little details, like all of the walls are like worn at hand height from where he's been like feeling his way down them
cool.
like all these years, and like just shit like that is so good. They don't draw attention to it, but you can tell that they thought about it. And that's what I really appreciate, is like where that intent is there in the set design. My favorite sequence in the movie is when he's chasing them in the basement after he's turned the lights out. First of all, I really respect this film's decision to do like a grayscale like night vision filter for that
I think it's one of
sequence.
the best dark view sequences I've seen.
yes.
I agree. I wish more films had the balls to do that, because
Well,
I'm so sick of the green, night vision goggle view.
I'm sick of the green, but I mean, usually that's motivated by like people using night vision goggles, but usually what they do for places that are like dark is they're just overlit. So like we can see them, but then the actors are like reaching around like they can't see anything, and there's that kind of like disconnect between like the characters and the audience. And something like this, it's like, yeah, the lights go out, we just switch to like a grayscale night vision, and it's still dim and dark enough to be scary, but also like it actually does feel like they're in the dark.
One of the things that I loved about it, like the camera that they were using, had a very limited range on it. So within just a couple of feet, things just fell back into darkness.
Yeah.
So even though we're in a room that's only like, maybe 30 feet, squared, like 20, 25 feet, like it's not very big. And there are like rows of shelving, like old like hardware shelving and stuff. Like it feels massive. Like the space feels huge because like things just immediately disappear into the darkness, and it gives you that same sense that like looking off into the depths of a ravine, does, like that sense of like thalassophobia almost, of like what's lurking in the depths beyond, like which is in this case only like 4 feet away. Very cool. It was quite effective.
It's a really clever reversal of the spatial awareness we get in the above ground version of the house.
Yeah.
Because during that sequence, we obviously see the basement is locked. And so obviously the camera doesn't go down there whatsoever. And things are revealed down there. But also once the lights are turned out, we don't have an awareness of the space.
Yeah, I would say even with the lights on, like you don't have a great awareness of the layout of the basement. I like that as kind of a foil to giving you sort of the blueprint of the upper 2 floors of the house. To go back to your point, Cleve, about how shallow like the depth of the light is in that, where he's just kind of like listening around for them and then just kind of like drops back into the dark, and then like we see Rocky like groping her way through, and he sort of like materializes again, and she's getting closer and closer to like reaching out and touching him, and the only thing that saves her is Alex in the other room like calling her name, and the blind man like shoots in that direction like right before her fingers touch him, so she knows he's there all of a sudden.
Deus Alex Machina.
God, yeah, that's for sure the highlight of the film for me, is that sequence. I wish more movies would do shit like that. Well, shall we start talking narrative subversions a little bit?
Spoiler alert.
Start talking about the blind man as like the true villain.
Sure. Well,
You thought the darkness was your ally.
The whole inciting bit about him having money comes from some rich girl hit his daughter drunk driving or something. And she didn't go to jail, but instead they paid him out a settlement. And so he had like what they thought was like $300,000 in cash. Turns out even more than that.
More like $1 million, yeah.
They make their way down to the basement and they find the girl who ran over his daughter chained up in the basement.
Yeah, he has a dungeon down there. I love the way that they set up the basement just in general. Like, when they first get into the house, they assume, oh, the money's down in the basement because there's a huge padlock on the basement door. Like, why would he be trying to protect that so much? And, after he's killed Money and he's, like, first, checking the house to see if anybody else is there, we see that, oh, he's got a safe in the closet where Rocky is hiding. That's where all the money is. And then they cut from the safe to the basement door with the padlock, and it's like, well, if the money's up here, then what could be down in the basement?
What could it be?
Love that first little subversion, and then it's like, oh yeah, well, he's actually got this woman chained up down here. And, they release her and try to get out, and he shows up and accidentally shoots her, and then he's sad about it. He's sad about killing the girl who killed his daughter. What's going on there? And then the ultimate subversion.
The yikes twist.
content warning, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
Rape and weird sex stuff
Yep.
Ahead. Rapey waters ahead. Turns out that he was actually keeping her down there.
Yar, matey. Yikes.
Avast, it's bad.
Yeah.
Turns out he was actually keeping her down there to impregnate her so she could give him a new child to make up for the one that she took from him. Mm-hmm. And that's why he was sad that he accidentally killed her, because she was pregnant. We find this out when he's captured Rocky and like strung her up in like his weird BDSM dungeon.
Well, okay, so you say BDSM dungeon, and it is that.
Yeah.
But what's cool about it,
He's got her
to
strung
paint
up
a
in
picture,
like a sex harness. It's, yeah.
Well, actually, to paint a picture, I don't think it's a sex harness. I'm pretty sure it's a parachute strap. Like it's a military
it seemed
issue,
military grade, of
like
some sort.
parachute harness. And the look of the basement itself is, if it wasn't for the person strung up, almost kind of homey. It's got like I think the context, the setting, the music, etc. But like it looks lived in. It looks like it's got like plants on the left and right, and the place where she's bound up is like covered in padding like all the way around.
Those are couch cushions.
Yes, like couch cushions, like a little reading nook. You know,
Weird, man.
I don't want to go to your reading nook.
No, me either.
No, to me it's very creepy.
well, it's horrifying, and I think it's
know-
more what I'm trying to say is it's more horrifying because of that. Like, because it's not it's not a German dungeon porn dungeon. It's like couch cushions and plants. That makes it scarier, is what I'm saying. Like, it's spookier because of that.
Yeah, because he's trying to like justify himself as like not an evil person. I mean, which
makes him way spookier.
which he certainly is. But you know, when he has Rocky strung up, he makes a point of saying, "I'm not a rapist."
See, this is what I was gonna get into
yeah,
a moment ago.
He's like, "I'm not a rapist."
As he's grabbing the turkey baster.
I've never forced myself on anybody, but yeah, his definition of not a rapist just means that like,
No penetration, but
yeah,
here's the
instead,
thing. Like,
instead he's been saving his cum in fucking in a fridge, and he fills a big old turkey baster up with it. It's
the thing.
Nasty, man.
Here's the thing.
I have
That's-
mixed feelings about this whole sequence.
that's called rape with extra steps.
yeah, it's still rape.
Like on what planet is that not rape? I feel like that sequence would have been spookier without the dialogue, honestly. If we just been left to like come to that conclusion on our own and just seen him with the baster and been like, what the fuck is going on? And had him not explain what was going on, it would have been spookier.
I don't know if I agree. I actually think the dialogue is pretty solid there with the
There is no God.
the no God stuff. I think this whole sequence is really sleazy, but I think it works really well because there is an internal logic to his thought. You know, even if it's twisted and terrible, it doesn't feel comic book villain in the respect that, you know, you can track why he's thinking that, even though it's awful and terrible. I do think the production design adds to it a lot too, because of the couch cushions. It feels like a padded room, you know, like an insane asylum
Yeah.
almost. And the clinical fluorescence really add to that.
It's effective. There's little doubt. And I would say it is more tasteful than your standard, like, rapey villain. Like, oh, they're bad, you know, so we have to get them, you know, they have to be rapey.
Tasteful is
But-
maybe not the
well,
word I would use.
More tasteful than a rapey villain, which is bottom bar. I'm saying that's not much. It's still wretched, and it's
See, I
still
think-
like all the rest of it, and even exploitative. But is it for the subject matter? Is it well handled? I think so.
I mean, I think it is executed in an extremely effective way. I think that his attempted justification for what he's doing makes it worse.
Which is why I think the
Yes, that's a good point.
dialogue makes it scarier.
Yeah, it's I would actually agree, because like, not to advocate for rapey characters in movies, but it's like, it's that kind of thing is so done that I think that there's almost an expectation for that, for like the villain to be rapey, and then to have him try to be like, but I'm actually not a rapist, is like, I think that that's grosser. I think that that's more horrifying. And while I think that the scene is very effective in that, like, it really skeeves me out, and it's obviously intended to do that, I do kind of question its necessity in this movie.
That's what I was gonna ask. Is like, do you think
Yeah,
that
I want to extend that question to y'all.
the film is better with or without it? And I'm definitely asking it because at this moment I'm not totally sure. Here's the thing. That's the sequence that I knew about going into this film. I was like, oh, great,
Yeah.
turkey baster, gross. I'm not here for this. And it was way better handled than what was in my head, than the picture that was painted for me before seeing this film. I thought, if you're going to do something like that, like, this is the way to do it, but I wonder if you should do it at all. And that's sort of the
That's kind
question.
of where I, that's kind of
And
where I'm
I don't have an answer for that. I'm just going to leave it as a question, I think. I don't feel like I need to answer that, or I have any authority on whether I should. But, like, it's just, is it necessary? You know,
I think this is a brutal, nasty little film in terms of set and characters and character motivation, and to have things escalate to something that is truly horrifying pushes it from Hitchcockian thriller to true pulpy genre horror. And for that reason, I think it works. If you left it out, it would still be a tense thriller, but it wouldn't be a horror movie in the same respect. And I think there's a catharsis in the reversal that happens with the turkey baster.
Certainly there is.
yeah, there did need to be something in the basement. And so much of the latter half of the film revolves around this premise. It would be extremely difficult to remove from the movie. Like,
Well, I mean, I think you could just have him, like, imprison and torture, like, the woman who killed his daughter, and it would serve basically the same narrative purpose. Would it be as effective? That's where I don't really have an answer on it. Like, I questioned the necessity of that scene when the first time I saw it, and I still do now, and I don't know if I have a better answer, because, like, it's genuinely, like, the most disturbing and harrowing scene in the film, and for that, like, it's extremely effective in what it sets out to do, but I still think there's so much good shit in this movie that not a whole lot would be lost without it. And that's why I say, like, I don't know. Is it there just to be sleazy and gross? Like, does it serve a higher purpose in the film? Does it really elevate the film that much?
yeah. Or is it shock value?
Or is it shock value? And in that sense, like, it is an exploitation film for sure. Like, a lot of exploitation films are about that shock value, and I think it does have its place. I really don't know. And I don't think that I'm qualified to say so one way or another. I think it varies. I think that scene could be very difficult for, you know, people who have, like, experienced sexual violence, and that's why I'm always wary of scenes like that, like, needing to serve a higher purpose, because, like, if you're gonna subject people to something like that, I think it should have a reason. So I don't know. That's just kind of my 2 cents.
It's also just like we get that he's a monstrous person, he's bad, it's a movie, and, you know, he's gone off his rocker, but just find a donor, you know, like it's a thing you can do. Like there are way easier ways. But I guess
Well,
it
yeah,
has
but
to be the girl who took his daughter or
Right.
whatever, so it's like,
Well,
whatever.
that's why I think it works for me, is because I think it's legitimately scary. Whereas if you just had the girl in the basement and he was torturing her, it's terrible and it's awful, but that you can see his logic.
It would be lessened effect, yeah.
I think the reason it's effective in this movie that he did what he did is because, you can still see the train of logic in his mind, but it's so much more twisted beyond any sort of justification.
Honestly, part of me kind of like wishes that he wasn't just so blatantly monstrous. Like I enjoy that sort of like dichotomy of who am I supposed to root for here.
As
you
long as
know?
everyone's intriguing, yeah, I agree. And here
I,
everyone
like
is.
I want these character I want Rocky to be able to get her sister out of the terrible household she lives in, but also like this man has been has lost a lot and has been traumatized, and like they're breaking into his house and taking advantage of him and stealing from him, and I like that like I don't know who's really in the right here, and I think that like the woman in the basement and then especially like the turkey baster thing removes that distinction entirely. It takes him and makes him entirely monstrous, no redemptive qualities any longer whatsoever. It's like, this is the villain. And in a respect, I can appreciate that. In another, I think it kind of removes some nuance. I don't know. The movie's so good. Like it's hard for me to like really mark points against it for that. But I think that
Well, I think one interesting thing about, speaking of nuance, is one critical, very minor scene after Rocky escapes the house. They cut to the airport where she's with her sister, I think.
Yeah.
It is. And they have a news report of what happened. They found the aftermath.
We learned that he survived.
Well, not only that he survived, but they paint the picture that he is the victim.
Yeah.
And I kind of like the nuance of, to an outside observer, seeing the aftermath of what is
blind
there
man robbed, yeah.
is sympathetic, but in the direct situation, it is very not sympathetic.
I see where you're coming from. That kind of bothers me at the end because it almost feels a little bit unrealistic. Like, there's no way that they wouldn't have found his dungeon when they searched the house. Like, there's no way they wouldn't have found, like, the weird harness and, like, the padded room where somebody's obviously been restrained. They'd find the turkey baster full of cum lying on the floor. There's no way that the police investigating the situation would look at this and think like, yeah, this is kosher, this is cool. So it's like, in a sense, to try to have the news report like.
Here's the thing, though.
Like,
We're actually, I do think that there is a small degree of validity to it. Is it's his house, so I don't know if there would be a full blown investigation at the hands of whatever budget the Detroit police force has, because like it is his own house, like that was broken into. I don't know how thorough of a search would be done.
Right, but he was in the basement. He fell down there and the gun misfired and shot him. So when they found him, they would have found him down there.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you're right. He was in the basement, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Like with the sex harness. Oh yeah, weird.
In
Yeah.
some respects, it seems like they were trying to do the Halloween-esque thing of.
Oh, also
You know,
the girl
the,
who died, like she was bound and like had the gag and everything. Like
Yeah, her
no,
body would have
you're
been
so
down
right.
there, too.
Yeah, like they're even like a non.
They would have found Money's body not only with the gunshot that killed him, but also like the gardening shears like stabbed into his body. Like, not to give too much credit to cops, but like I feel like any cop worth their salt would look at this situation and say like, there's way more going on here than we're being told. Maybe it's just indicative of like how the system fails in those kinds of regards, which it certainly does all the time. But if that's the way you're going to paint it, then like, I think have some more intent with that, show how the system failed, how the system overlooked these, like, the sex dungeon and shit like that.
That's a really good point. One thing I do want to say to kind of capstone the whole turkey baster sex dungeon stuff is I feel like a lot of the revenge thriller, rape revenge stuff in horror movies is a little tired at this point and done, but it's very exploitative, and it's focused on, you know, the family of the victim taking vengeance at any cost. And I feel like in some respects this movie takes that and emphasizes the evil of taking vengeance to such a respect.
Yeah,
and I
for
think
sure.
that is kind of interesting in itself. I think its methods of doing so are definitely pulpy and a little sleazy, but I think this movie is so stylish that it finds a way to get away with it.
The style is a worthwhile point since we've capstoned that topic. I think that so many of the good graces of this film ride on its production value. As we've said before, the premise alone, I think, is nothing to really turn heads, but the making of this movie is where it shines the most. The cinematography, the lighting, the acting, all of the production level stuff is tight. It's clean, it's well made, and I think that's why this film is like elevated to any degree.
The attention to detail.
Because man, if it wasn't like it would just be another like page, you know.
There would be some things that I think would be harder to forgive. Yeah, like there's really so much done well in execution. And that attention to detail that I was talking about earlier. Like when he knows that there are more than one burglar because he finds their shoes at the back door because they took their shoes off to walk through, or that when he finally has his monologue in that turkey baster scene, his voice is kind of like weak and cracked and disused.
Sounds a little like Bane.
He's got a little Bane thing
You
going
think the
on.
darkness was your ally.
But like he's been living alone for years. You know, he probably has not been using his voice. He doesn't talk. So like it's just like all of those little things. Like I said, it goes to show that they thought about all of this.
Yes.
Like
Which
it's little details that in and of themselves don't mean much, but like add up to like there was intent.
Even more direct things like her ladybug tattoo.
Yeah.
I thought that's one element where worse directors' hands would have been corny as hell, but I think because of how stylish and how tightly paced this movie is and, you know, well executed it is, I think it works really well.
I did enjoy the ladybug premise where we get her backstory of having been locked in the trunk of the car, like because her mother was basically abusing her, and how like a ladybug landed on her finger one time and it kept her company there, and so ladybugs are very important to her, and it gives her a familiarity with the trunks of cars, which is cool. As later on, when she escapes out of the house for the first time, she's being chased by the big old Rottweiler, who's a very good boy. He's a very good boy.
Very good boy, but also I just fucking love that scene. It's like she gets outside, the blind man comes out on his porch and she's like shouting at him, is like, I got away, there's nothing you can do,
You have no power here.
You're useless out here. And then it just like cuts back to him, and then the dog runs out the door and just starts chasing her. It's like, yeah, you forgot about good boy.
Yeah.
Like,
And so she gets chased by the very good boy into the car, their escape vehicle, but the key, you know, they don't have the key there. And she comes up with this clever scheme of luring the dog into the trunk so she can get out. And I love that. Like, and it's so, once again, it's so meticulously thought out. You get a sense of the mechanics of the scene, which I'm a big fan of. Puzzles. Love them. Love me a puzzle. And
it's the payoff for the ladybug thing, which I do think the setup, it's like, oh, is that a new tattoo? Yeah, it's a ladybug because I was locked in a trunk. Like, I think that
I think it's kind of fun. Like,
the setup is sappy and hokey, and I don't like it, but the payoff makes it worthwhile.
Right,
Yeah,
and
well,
like,
it goes
fun
back
of
to the
it.
trunk,
Like,
and the ladybug comes back and flies onto her finger.
Yeah.
And, you know, after she looks at the ladybug, she sees right outside of her view the leash that she uses for the trunk.
Yeah.
So
And I like that she deals with the dog without killing it.
yeah, right? Because, well, then we couldn't like her. That's the thing.
I mean,
like
sure we could. I mean, she's in danger of death. Like, she's protecting herself.
I mean,
like, it would be
yes.
easy. It would be easy to have her shoot the dog or something.
Yeah, but I mean, morally, like, she'd be in the right, but I mean, like, we're talking about movie rules.
I don't think it would. I don't think it would.
You
make,
can't kill a dog and be a good guy.
I don't think it would make me dislike her if she had killed the dog, but it makes you like her more that she doesn't.
Yes, absolutely. Full agree there. Now, I will say that it's a very small nitpick, but I do think it's funny that in a film that's so mechanically minded and thinks through all the little minutia, that would get such a world-breaking rule as her bending over to like get the leash out of the trunk, and for her pants, which have been cut open at this point, like to not have any rips in them.
Oh, just a scrap of pussy.
Like
Just a crumb.
just a crowd, please. Like I just think it was weird that like that was in the shot at all. We get a view of her posterior when like just don't have that in the shot. Like
Honestly,
I don't see, because like her pants have been ripped open and there's no rip, and it's just like that's a big point in the film.
That continuity error bothers me less than the fact that she beats him by turning on the alarm system in his house.
Big point.
And, oh no, it's too loud! Now he's deafened! Oh no! Even though he's been firing handguns in enclosed spaces for the last, like, literally all night in the movie from, like, for just hours. Like, especially the revolver that he gets from, like, under his bed. That's like a fucking 357. That's a fucking hand cannon.
I think
it would have blown out his fucking eardrums firing that in the basement.
to make an excuse for the film, I think that works in that it's not necessarily it's too loud for his ears, but that
It's coming from everywhere.
well, yeah, like it is disorienting him.
For sure.
And he's not in agony there because of the pain of the sound. He's in agony because he's been foiled and he's mentally unstable.
I can get down
I think
with that.
that's why. So I'm willing to give that a pass.
I can get down with
I'm
it.
willing to
but-
give all of it a pass,
But even
honestly,
so, like, the fact that he'd be able to... So much of the film hinges upon him, like, finding them from his, like, acute sense of hearing.
Mm-hmm.
And in the basement, he's just running around firing this gun willy-nilly. And, like, that would be extremely loud. Like, at the very least, he would have a really bad case of tinnitus, which would make it a lot harder to hear people. in the house.
It's a weird judgment gap because early on in the movie we see Money use a water bottle as a makeshift silencer.
Yeah, right.
So there was a little thought into the sound of guns, and then that was
And then-
kind of just
promptly forgotten. Yeah. I mean, it's a minor thing. Like,
it was a cool shot with the water bottle,
yeah.
you know, get all the smoke coming out of it.
Anyway,
I don't think I have anything else.
I was gonna say, is it time to rate?
You know, sound design good. Score is great. I love me some industrial tension building, mood setting music.
I will say, I mentioned the audience earlier, and I don't think I've heard quite a gasp from the audience as when the turkey baster first came out.
Yeah, that's true.
So I'll
I mean,
give.
it is shocking. Like there's no contention there. Like we definitely, I think we all agree it was shocking. I just
They got a pop from the audience, bigger than I've seen in a lot of horror movies in the past decade or so.
Well, do you want to rate, Ben? Why don't you go first?
Yeah. I think this movie is fantastic. I think it's the perfect balance between tight thriller and pulpy genre film. It's such a perfectly stylized movie. The style is so in the forefront, but it never feels particularly style over substance. It feels really economical. The whole film is super tight in pacing and building the world and building the environment. I think it's just really, really intelligently made and thoughtful in terms of detail. I think the sound design and the score are both great, and the acting is fantastic. I could, praise this movie for a really long time. Obviously it's number 8 in my top 10 of the decade. It's gonna be really hard not to give this movie a 5, but I'm gonna give it a 4.5. You guys made some good points. I think it's a really fantastic film, though, and I would absolutely recommend it.
Cleveman.
It's pretty good. Worth watching. I'm going to give it a 4. I thought it was pretty good.
Nice. Yeah, I really like this movie. It definitely has aged well, I think. It got a lot of the same reactions out of me as the last time I saw it about 4 years ago. Really well constructed. I'm going to give it a 4.5 out of 5 as well, just for, docket minor points for, like, the gun thing. And also, like, I do still question the necessity of, like, some of the shock value stuff, despite how well it's executed. But, yeah, a really meticulously made film. Definitely Fede Alvarez's best that I have seen. But that will give Don't Breathe an average rating of 4.3 out of 5 pods. Next week, it's my choice again, and I fancied a bit of the ultra-violence. So, no, sorry, no, Clockwork Orange isn't a horror movie.
Oh, you got my hopes
I know.
up for a second. I was like, because it was going through my head. I was like, is that a horror film? Does that count? Because
No.
I've read the book twice. Like,
No.
yeah, I'm quite familiar.
But I do fancy a touch of the ultra-violence, and so I want to watch and talk about the Korean revenge thriller / horror I Saw the Devil.
Oh, awesome. I actually just watched this movie like 2 or 3 days ago.
Oh, really?
For the first time. So
That was the first. I could have sworn we watched it together in college.
yeah, so I'm super excited to talk about this movie.
Yeah, it's fucking awesome.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of love for, like, Korean revenge dramas, and this is the one that most firmly also crosses the line into horror. So I figured it would be a good chance, and also because I haven't seen it in years, and I really just want to watch it again. So yeah, that'll be next week. Cleveland, do we have a sponsor?
Oh,
I saw where you were going there for a second. I'm glad you stopped.
that's why I said, oh. Yeah, it's like my brain went one direction and nope. You know,
Not cummy based.
I've done things in poor taste before, but I think I should probably draw a line somewhere, and I think that's where. This episode is brought to you by Charleston Tuberals yarn. When you need to draw a line in the sand, but the sand is too dense to draw in, put down a line of yarn. Instead, a Charleston Tubal. It's not edible, no relation.
Wow. Fantastic.
Yep, you're welcome for that piece of nonsense.
Speaking of nonsense, if you like the show, share an episode with your friends. Maybe don't start with this one.
Probably not.
But you can, we have a huge backlog of stuff to check out. You can listen to more of our episodes if you haven't already.
That's a good one. Greasy Strangler is probably still our. I think it's our best episode. Like, I'm quite proud of that one.
Probably our most popular.
Yeah. I mean, God, I hate that film, but I think it did generate good content out of us.
Unforgettable.
But anyway, leave us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and a nice review. You can follow us on Twitter at PodPeoplePod and let us know how you feel about
The show.
You can follow us on Letterboxd too at letterboxd.com/podpeoplepod for a list of all the films we've talked about on the show with our average ratings and links to those episodes. You can find me on Twitter at Deep State Aussie.
I'm on Twitter at Mr. Sheets.
And I'm rarely tweeting for Light Arc Studio as we continue to put out progress on our next game, our next big update to It Stares Back. There it is.
Got there.
And that's what matters. People are here for the journey, you know?
Yeah.
And you can also key into my work on ArtStation if you like spooky thrills and chills. Commissions are open as of the time of recording. Just search Cleveland Mosier and I should pop right up. And I didn't talk about It Stares Back enough. It's really good. We're in early access on Steam. Those are the words I'm supposed to say here.
Yep.
And that's it.
All right. Well, until next time,
Breathe.
Remember to keep breathing.
Yep.
Bye.